but I don't think I've ever heard a proper like theological explanation of that point. Like what is their argument? How does someone like that come to that conclusion?
So the bishop's conclusion.
Yeah. Or someone from that camp, how do they articulate, their argument that women should be ordained in alliance with the way that we understand the authority of Scripture? I understand these denominations that, have kind of throwaway parts of the Scripture, like, okay, I guess you can do whatever you want. But how do you marry the two from a Lutheran perspective of Scripture and then women can be ordained?
Well, first of all, the thing that happens is that the two passages, the 1 Corinthians passage and the Timothy passage, first of all, their clarity is questioned. So, do they really say this? What does the Greek grammar say? What's this really about? Isn't it about this? What's the grammatical antecedent of this part of the? So there's lots of, I would say, obscuring arguments introduced into the interpretation of these passages, which for 20 centuries of the church's history have been clear. It's amazing. But so you obscure them, you question their meaning, you question, and then you say, well, then also, right, their context is problematic. So they don't actually apply to the context we have today because the context is different. And so they don't even speak to the question of the ordination of women today because of what was happening back then and the fact that it was different.
Meaning like a different culture?
A different culture, yeah. So the cultural thing is brought out. And then so they're obscured. They're dismissed on cultural and contextual grounds. And so they don't speak to the question of women's ordination anymore. And so, yeah, they're interpreted very much as in a way which is bound to their original context, which means that they don't speak today. When I was a young pastor, when I graduated in 1988 and I went out into the parish, this analysis of the texts was already out there, and I was kind of not exactly sympathetic to it, but I was actually listening to this and thinking, well, could there be something in that? And then over the next years, I started to actually study those texts more closely when I had the opportunity. The more I've studied them over the years, the more I've become convinced that they are clear, that the Church's historic teaching on the ordination of women is correct. They speak to the Church today. They speak to the Church of all times, actually. And so, yeah, but I mean, it's like that classic case. What you do is you obscure the text, you question its authority, you question its relevance, cultural relevance, and then when you've done that, you say, okay, well, then we're going to pull in all of these other texts, like the Galatians 3 text. There's no male or female, no Jew or Greek. So as if that speaks to the question of ordination,
right?
Which it never has.
Yeah.
So I would say that what happens is that there are all kinds of conjuring tricks.
Yeah.
Interpretive, hermeneutical, and biblical conjuring tricks that are used to obscure the texts that are clear and to pump up the texts that that might seem to support the whole thing,